What's going on, people? Happy Monday, and welcome back to another episode of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Today, I talk with Keirsten Sires, a Skidmore College tennis recruit who changed paths and ended up making an impact on the soccer field. She discusses her sports career pivot and how she became the founder and CEO of her company, Two-A-Days. So again, welcome back to the A2A podcast. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. So we are back with another A2A podcast. Today we are sitting down with Keirsten Sires. And Keirsten, I like I said to you before we started recording, I'm really excited to get to this conversation because, you know, you are involved in so many different things, you know, outside of being an athlete in college and everything else. You've been an entrepreneur, a creator. You're always on the go. You're always doing something. So I'm really intrigued by your entire story, and I can't wait to hear it from the source. But before we get into it, why don't I allow you to kind of introduce yourself, tell us all the different things that you're involved in, the sports you played, and where you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all. But thanks for the intro, too, because I feel like my ego is a little bit boosted right now. I'm feeling pretty good. All the compliments. So my name is Keirsten Sires. I am the founder and CEO of Two-A-Days, formerly LRT Sports, but now we've rebranded to Two-A-Days, which I'm super happy about. And basically, our focus is on allowing college student athletes to rate their coaches, all athletic staff, facilities, and campus visits. So anything to do with recruiting college athletics. College athletes can go on and rate. That way the next generation can kind of consume that information. Parents can also kind of consume the information, be more knowledgeable before they make a decision on what college that they want to attend, especially when it comes to college athletics. And I played tennis and soccer in college. I graduated in 2014 from Skidmore, and I was a business major. So those are just some quick high-level, accolades as far as everything is concerned, and probably the most relevant to why I started my business and everything else.
Yeah. So were you a multi-sport athlete as a young kid too, and it just kind of carried on throughout your entire career?
Yeah, I have a very interesting story. So I played every sport growing up. Anything my parents would get me into, including boys lacrosse for a period of time as well, because my school didn't have girls lacrosse. So always playing a lot of different sports. Got to high school and I decided to start specializing in tennis. So I kind of quit everything else to focus on tennis. For those of you that don't know, tennis is a very time consuming sport because it's not high school team driven, it's tournament driven. So you're really playing all year round, every single weekend in tournaments, traveling, and kind of really honing in on the external factors of the sport. It's not just like, football where it's, your high school team really matters. With some showcases, this is, something that's very tournament driven. So decided to start specializing, was recruited for tennis. And then after my freshman year, my freshman year of college, decided to quit tennis at Skidmore. I wanted to stay there. So I knew I didn't want to transfer, but I wanted to keep playing college sports. So I was actually a walk-on for soccer my last 3 years of college, which was crazy because I didn't play soccer in high school. I was a tennis player, so I had a lot of catch up to play as far as being a college soccer player was concerned. But I had a situation where I didn't totally love my coach and, for my tennis coach at Skidmore. And I decided that it was best for me to kind of remove myself from the situation after my freshman year and quit. And then, like I said, be a walk-on for soccer, which ended up loving my coach. My cousin's actually playing for her right now at Skidmore, which is hilarious because, it's however many years later. And yeah, that's just like kind of how it flowed for me, which is a very weird story because a lot of times people transfer. But I decided I loved my school, so I was just going to switch sports.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean most kids, and I'm sure, even more so nowadays, when they don't love the sport that they're in, or there's something wrong, or I mean even if it's something minuscule, it's straight to the transfer portal, right? So,
Yeah.
but for you, that was very different. Now in high school, what made you focus solely on tennis? And I want to kind of get back to that coach point because a lot of times, and I work with a lot of athletes and coaches, you're hearing that these coaches want their athletes to centralize. If you're a baseball player, they want you playing fall ball, they want you lifting weights, they want you focusing on their sport, right? There's only a select few that say, hey, we want multi sport athletes, we want people from a lot of disciplines. What made you want to just centralize outside of that busy schedule, obviously, where club is the focus?
Yeah, so I actually don't know if I would recommend specialization, even though that's what I did. I wish that I stuck with the other sports. I wish that I competed um, in at least one other sport, ideally two other sports. But I think early sports specialization at that time was very much like starting a huge trend, and it was you have to focus on your sport. There wasn't a lot of research showing anything outside of like multi-sport athletes, and to be honest, there wasn't really much research showing anything. I mean, it was like barely even like, people were starting to weight train and starting to do speed training, and there was like, I remember speed training gyms that were just starting to pop up back in my day. So I think that thought of I'm going to specialize in my sport, and then that's going to be able to get me to play in college was very trendy or very up and coming. I actually don't recommend it though. And I think there's a lot of back and forth on whether or not how people feel about that specifically. But I do think in general, using other sports to your advantage can 100% help your main sport. It's fine to have a main sport and really focus in and go all in on that. But I think playing the other sports really helps with different types of cross training and seeing the ball differently and a lot of other things. So for me specifically, it was just a decision of that's kind of what people were advising me to do. It's kind of what coaches were hearing at the time. That's what was trickling down from the college coaches. So it was okay, I'm getting to this point. I need to make a decision on what sports I want to stick with. And that's what I did at the time.
Mhm.
Hindsight is 2020 though, so of course I would tell myself something differently now, but I am here for a reason, so I don't regret it. But for any athletes, for the most part, I don't. I think playing other sports is a great thing.
Mhm. Yeah, now, did you before you even got to high school and started to centralize? Did you grow up in a really like sports centric area where everyone around you was an athlete? I mean, you mentioned that you played boys lacrosse because there wasn't a girls team. Was that the kind of ecosystem that you grew up in where you had siblings, cousins that were all being athletes and that was just what you did?
Yeah, I think yes. And my mom was also a college volleyball player. So sports were always a huge part of my life. And then I think I went to a really small school, and I think like my identity at that small school became being an athlete. And I won awards when I was in middle and elementary school and everything. And I think that really became part of like who I was as far as just my hobbies outside of school was sports. And again, across sport, I played basketball, I played volleyball, played soccer, I played a lot of different sports growing up. And I think I always just kept super active and super busy. I think it was a good way to always make friends instantly when you're on a team. And my parents were definitely always just encouraging me to play sports and be active. And then I lived on a street, there's like 19 kids all around my age on the street. We're always out on the street playing, doing whatever. So I think that element also added another layer of things where it's like, even if you're not playing an organized sport, we were still out there playing foursquare, wiffle ball, whatever it may be. So just
Hmm.
trying to always get out there. But I think as far as that's concerned, like I said, my mom was a college athlete. So she was just always super, super into just like playing any and every sport. And then my family, a couple other college athletes throughout the family as well. So overall, just a lot of people liking to get outside and do stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's usually how it goes, where you grow up in an atmosphere where everyone is competitive, and that's where you get your competitive spirit. And getting back to when you started to centralize when you were in high school, how did you balance the academic side as well as the athletic side? Because as you know, and as you said, the tennis community, it's not really based in high school. So a lot of it is based in club where you have to travel very far. So how are you starting to balance the academic as well as the athletic side as a athlete who is centralizing in one sport?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a matter of prioritization, obviously. So, like, as far as like how I grew up, and my parents' school was always first. There was never any question of that. It was grades come first. If you play a college sport, or tennis helps you get into college, that's amazing. But you're going there to get a degree. And especially with tennis, a lot of times, like, professional tennis players, typically speaking, don't end up going to college. So it's more a
Hmm.
focus of, very young, like you've heard of kids who are on the tour in their teens and everything. It's pretty much like a young sport. So at that point, my parents are like, listen, kid, you're not going to be a professional tennis player, which, it's fine. And even if you are, good for you, but you're still going to have your degree to fall back on. And that's something that we really want to make sure that you prioritize. So I think, given that it was always school first, I think everything else kind of falls into place, because it's like, hey, I love playing sports and I know that I need to be successful in this in order to continue doing these things. So I think it was just a matter of prioritizing. I'd come home from school, do work right away, get everything done, and then, bearing that there was no game or something that overlapped. But for the most part, my routine was come home from school, do my work right away, and then go and participate in whatever I needed to specifically.
Hmm. So as you are, balancing being a teenager, trying to have a social life, the school aspect, the athlete aspect, when does the other X factor of recruiting start to come into play? And, you know, seeing as how you were more school central, and your parents put that focus on you, and said, you know, the education is going to be the number one thing. Were you thinking D1, D2, D3, or were you just thinking, I'm going to go to the best academic institution that I could go to and will allow me to play my sport?
It was totally academic. That was 100% it. And it didn't necessarily matter the division. And for tennis, like, the stats are really interesting, because it's like one of the highest sports with international players, for men's and women's. So you're competing really internationally when you're talking about college tennis. And I think I knew that, number one. And number two, another thing for me was I didn't want to get hung up on a division. If there was a right fit for social life, for academics, for everything else, then that was something that was super important to me. Um, and, I had talked to coaches at different universities, D1 and D3 primarily. I'm not sure if I got any recruiting by D2 schools, to be honest with you, but D1 and D3 were basically where it just naturally honed in on. And from there, I went on all my recruiting trips and really decided my top two schools were Skidmore and Middlebury. Middlebury is also a D3 school, it's in Vermont. And those are my top two schools. And I fell in love with, like I said, I went to a small school growing up. So I really liked the small class sizes. I liked the intimate setting with professors, being able to know professors, the different majors that they offered. I really liked the idea of like a liberal arts education and being forced to have to do art credits, and, just a different plethora of like different classes and everything, I think was super important to me. But as far as like because I think you mentioned in the beginning, when did the recruiting process kind of start? I think I was always thinking about it from the time that I decided that I was going to just go with tennis, but recruiting conversations started about sophomore year for me.
Hmm.
And now I know it's different, because there's rules around things for different divisions and everything else. So, you know, that it was a different element at the time, because there wasn't really any rules about specifically when to reach out and everything else like there are now. They've pushed
Hmm.
back a lot of those dates.
Yeah. Was it, as you started to narrow these schools down and going on more recruiting trips, did you find that you were basing a little bit more on that academic side? I mean, I know you said academics was that number one, but did you find once you were able to hone in on the community and the team and the coach, that the academics was kind of the cherry on top?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't know because it's such like a what came first, chicken or the egg? Because it it to me it felt like it had to be kind of a good blend of both. And
Hmm.
again, it was still like making sure it was a high academic institution, and it was almost like if the tennis and everything else fit, that would be awesome as well. And I know like I'm saying this now as a 30-year-old, but when I was getting recruited as a teenager, I think at that time I was thinking a little bit more sports centric, which isn't bad, you know, and there's a lot of things that play into that, especially when it comes to scholarships and acceptance and everything else. So, of course, to an extent, you're going to rely on decision making factors for your sport, but it was still always like an academic institution thing that was the most important, I think. And what was going to give me the best opportunity from a networking perspective, from career purposes, alumni purposes, and everything else. Because at the end of the day, when you're graduating, even a lot of professional athletes that are outside of like your major sports, you're still having to have a job on the side to be able to support yourself because a lot of
Hmm.
professional sports don't pay a lot of money, especially with when it comes to women.
Yeah. So as you go throughout your career playing high school tennis, when did you commit to Skidmore? You said you had your final two schools once you narrowed it down. When did you fully commit, and how did things change once you knew where you were going to go?
Yeah, so I verbally committed to Skidmore. I believe it was my summer going into my senior year. It felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders for sure. And I know, you know, I always, it's like so funny because now I tell other people, like, don't rush the process. I was trying to rush the
Hmm.
process because there's a lot going on. It's a lot of stress. You kind of just want an answer. There's a lot of things happening. But at that time, I had already gone on my recruiting visits and everything, and I felt really comfortable with my decision. So that's about when I verbally committed was that summer. I felt great, but I was always skeptical because luckily for me, I had um, really good coaches and people that I competed with that had explained, like, hey, just because you're verbally committed, just because you're having this conversation with this coach, it doesn't mean anything until you actually get accepted into the school. Like, you need to make sure that, like, you're staying on top of your grades and you're doing these things. So like although I was like very excited and happy, then it became okay, now I need to like apply and actually get into the school. And I was like always calling the coach and like, how are things looking? And he, you know, they can't
Yeah.
really say anything. And it's like this like weird song and dance that you're doing with like check-ins and everything. But then, you know, I actually applied early decision one. So I only applied to Skidmore and I applied early decision one, which means when you apply early decision that you as you know, obviously, but you have to go to the school if you get accepted. So I applied ED1. So I knew by December that I was going to Skidmore and committed and on the team and everything. So that was great because like December senior year came around and I was like, this is awesome. I don't really have to think about anything anymore
Yeah.
because one of the benefits of being a spring sport, it's a benefit and a downfall of being a spring sport is your recruiting is kind of really in your junior year. Whereas fall
Hmm.
sports, it's more like kind of could go into their senior year. They're still waiting for that fall season in your senior
Hmm.
year. Because by the time spring rolls around, your senior year, everybody's decided, you know, where you're going to school and everything else. So your spring sports kind of get that the last spring of junior year into summer is kind of that time where you're like, all right, I really got to compete hard and then I got to let it go. But you know, every season has that different recruiting process and that recruiting season time. So I was happy to be done. Still had to work hard, obviously, because now you got to get ready to play. You got to get ready to play with the big dogs.
Yeah.
Even if you think you're a big dog in high school, just not now you're with everybody that's a big dog. So, you know, then the work really starts.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the realization that basically every athlete has to kind of encounter. You're an all-star. You're being recruited, and once you get there, you realize that the guy you're competing with or the girl you're competing with, they were recruited too to do a job, and they were an all-star as well. So when you get to campus, what type of transition do you have to make once you get there and you kind of realize, this is elite, this is high level, and I need to either step up or step out of the way.
Right. 100% agree with you.
Yeah, and it's just like it's so crazy when, you finally get there. Did you have any growing pains once you got on campus, or was there, kind of an easier transition for you?
Yeah, I think I definitely had growing pains. It was my first time away from home. Although I will say I don't think I ever particularly got homesick or anything, but it's just a different level of like day to day decision making, obviously. And I think the transition just academically was definitely like, oh wow, okay. College is a whole new different ball game. To your point, everybody's getting recruited even just to go to the school, minus the athlete part. They're still recruiting students to go to your school.
Hmm.
Um, and at this point, every institution's always trying to figure out how to get the best just students in general. So I think there was a transition on that, and then um, from the team perspective, like tennis is obviously a very individual sport. And then once you go into college, it's now a team sport. I never really found any issues with that transition because I'm more of a team sports like player in general. Like I loved playing doubles. I was obviously on team sports growing up and everything, so I didn't really find a tough transition with that. But I did think I had a tough transition with people who maybe really hadn't ever been on a team before and were very individually sport driven, now trying to learn how to be a team player, I think is a different situation when you step into college.
Yeah, and for you, speaking of that team aspect, you went from tennis to soccer, and as we mentioned before, most kids today, when there's something wrong, they're headed to the transfer portal. They're looking for a different school. Why is
Mhm.
it that you wanted to stay, and not just stay, but play a completely different sport that you hadn't played in a very long time? Like, what was the thought process behind making that change?
I like making my life difficult. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Uh, no, I think first and foremost, I love Skidmore. I went to Skidmore for a reason. I loved my major. I loved my professors. Loved my friends. I loved everything about the school. Can't say enough good things about the school. So I wasn't unhappy in my day to day as far as like going to classes and social life and everything else. Like I was very happy there. The thought crossed my mind to transfer because the other part of it was I've worked so hard to play this sport and get to this point. How do I now let this go? But on the other hand, I worked so hard academically to get to this point. So how do I let that go? So I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I knew that I did not want to complete college without being a college athlete. So I like had a list of the sports I was going to try out for in order at Skidmore. Soccer being my number one. Then I was like, the volleyball team was really good at our school, but I was like, I'll try out, see what happens. I'll try out for softball. I'll try out all these different sports. Luckily, I tried out for soccer and ended up getting that so I didn't have to go down my list. But I was determined to make sure that I was a college athlete, just because again, the identity component, and then also I just genuinely loved being on a team. I think it was something that was really important for me. If I could still be on a team to this day, I 100% would. Um, and I think it's just one of those things where I liked where I was with everything else. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to let go of tennis and I'm going to try out for this new thing, see what happens. Spoke to the coach. She was happy to have me try it out. And then I eventually, it was like the summer going into my sophomore year, she had me go up to campus and like try out at like, how like all the colleges have camps like for high school kids and stuff. I was
Hmm.
with all the high schoolers, which I was like, I don't care. Whatever. Let me school some high schoolers.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yes.
mean, let's do it.
Yeah, so I went up that summer and she was like, all right, love your work ethic. You're super fast, but you're like obviously far behind on the skill component of things. So you got to work on that. Joined a team over the summer, worked my butt off nonstop. Just anything I could do to try and get better at soccer, I was doing. And then went back for preseason and then was like officially on the team. So it was like August, my sophomore year, when they went back for preseason. I went back with everybody, and then I had a spot in the locker room. I was on a soccer team.
Yeah,
But that was like the best decision I ever made. some of my best friends are on that team to this day. Like I said, I love the coach. She was invited to my wedding and still keep in contact with her and everything else. So, great overall life decision for me. So I'm happy that that's like what ended up happening for my path specifically. But to your point, not necessarily the normal thing to do.
For sure. And
Yeah.
one of the things, that kind of stuck out to me is like you said you worked so hard to get to that point with tennis. And athletes always have to go through that transition period of giving up the sport that they love, but normally it's when they're at the tail end of their careers where they're
Mm-hmm.
either graduating or an injury ends their career or some other X factor. You were giving this up and moving on to something different. How hard was it to say this is no longer serving me or this is not where I want to put my effort? And did you consult with anyone, friend, your parents, anyone as you were making that decision to try out for soccer?
Yeah, I would say my number one person that I was always like in contact with this about on this particular subject, like in depth, was my coach from growing up, my tennis coach from growing up. Um, had helped me like go through the recruiting process. Obviously, we spent many hours on the court together, and I was in a situation that I think was unique, especially because I wanted to try out for another sport, which he thought I could do. But I would say he was my number one person that I was talking to about this. Of course, I talked to my parents as well. They were 100% supportive over, I guess, whatever decision that I wanted to make because I was looking at it from a logical perspective. And I think I approached it with, I was never like angry about the situation, and I don't think I had any like bad feelings or ill will or anything um, with my tennis coach, or it was never anything like that. It was just like, hey, this like is not a good positive situation for me mentally and physically. So given that, I am going to move on, and I think my mindset overall was I never wanted to quit mid-season, didn't want to quit out on my teammates. So I made sure that we were completely done with the season. And I say that because we won our league and then we made to NCAA's. So we went past the school year. We were like into the summer pretty much still competing.
Mhm.
So it was definitely my coach from home, my parents that I really spoke to. More so than anybody else. And I had a couple trusted teammates at the time who kind of I spoke to here and there as well that I'm again still close with to this day. So there's definitely like a good support system as far as I'm concerned. And I think overall I had made my own decision though for sure. I don't think anybody was really swaying me one way or another, but it's always good to have like a sounding board. And I think it's good to have people help you realize if you're maybe, because one of the things is like, am I crazy? Am I viewing this wrong?
Yeah.
Am I approaching this in the right way? Do I have my head on straight? Am I being humble? Am I being all these things? And I think if you could find trusted people around you to be like, hey, I don't know that everything that you're going through, but from what you're telling me, it sounds like you're right, or you might be wrong on this, or could you reconsider these things, or maybe you should go talk to the person directly, or whatever it may be. I think it's always good to get other information or advice from people, but at the end of the day, I think I always had my mind pretty much made up.
Hmm. So in that same vein is the question that a lot of athletes have to kind of come to is what am I going to do when college is over? And so that's kind of where I want to take this to next is were you already thinking past college as a recruit? I think I kind of feel like you may have been doing that because you knew that it was academic first, right? So were what kind of questions were you asking yourself or avenues were you looking down to kind of figure out, okay, I'm not going to be an athlete forever. I'm already giving up tennis. I'm moving on to soccer. At some point, I'm not going to be on the field anymore. There's not going to be any cleats.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to probably be a desk or something else, right? So where do I go from here? So what took you to down the path that you took?
Yeah, I think I was definitely like very career focused. Like I had an internship, I think almost every summer in between college, like every single summer. Um, at different levels, obviously, because when you're going from freshman to sophomore year, people aren't going to hire you the way they're going to when you're going into your senior year. So at some degree, I had some sort of internship. Um, and that was always like a huge focus for me, was making sure that I was like ahead of the game on that type of stuff. And again, this is definitely like, I'm not like, oh my God, 18-year-old Kirsten just had her life together. Like, no, it was definitely my parents helping me out, being like, yo, you need to like figure it out. Like, check yourself. You're not going pro. Like, what are we doing after? So, nothing like parents to humble you. I think as far as that's concerned, like, we had gone into it, like, and I say myself and my parents, like, okay, you're gonna go to great academic school, awesome, figure it out. But they were like, you make the decision on what school, but just have that in mind. When I did make my own decision on that, like to the point where I was like, can you guys like tell me where you think I should go? And they were like, absolutely not. Like you have to decide. um, and then it became, now I'm looking for internships. And then once I did a couple internships, and my school was great. Like we had a business major, and they were great at like networking. So like they had so many events for us to network with like alumni and career people, like industry leaders and all these like speakers and all these different things. So I ended up utilizing my resources a lot and like getting cards from people who did speeches or talking to people about things that they were interested in. I think I ruled out relatively quickly, like, oh, I think I would want to go into this industry and not this one. Ended up being wrong about that, by the way. But at the time, the information I was getting, that's what I thought. So like my focus when I was in college was trying to go into finance, which I ended up working at Morgan Stanley right when I graduated. I had interned there junior going into senior year. And that was like my path that I kind of chose for myself, which um, didn't end up like, I'm not in finance anymore. But,
Yeah.
I think definitely was career driven as far as like needing to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And I actually didn't even go into school with a business major. I was an exercise science major going into college, and I ended up switching um, because I took a couple business classes and I just loved them. There was nothing wrong with exercise science. I just wasn't good at it, and I liked business classes better. So
Yeah.
exercise science is hard. Oh man.
I,
Yeah,
yeah,
that is
it
no
is.
joke. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, I think that's probably the path that a lot of athletes think they want to do. Because they're like, hey, I can stick in sports, and I've been doing this, so let's do exercise science. So I can completely relate on changing majors and stuff like that. I actually was a business major before becoming a journalist, so I
Yeah.
kind of went the opposite way. Because I wanted to stick in sports and didn't know it. I thought business was my thing, so I completely understand that. But as you're graduating and getting into the different career paths, what what took you to the entrepreneurial side of it, and how did LRT, now two-a-days, how did that come to fruition?
Yeah. So I will 100% give credit to Skidmore on this one because we had an entrepreneurship class. Um, and this is where this idea came up, was of two-a-days, was in this entrepreneurship class. And you had to start a company throughout the whole semester. At the end of the semester, you then pitch your company idea to investors or alumni who were industry leaders or whatever, whoever those people were at the time. And they kind of participate in what your grade is going to be. Um, so that's like where I would say the idea for two-a-days really came to life and started to get legs. And I started to understand, oh, this would be like a really cool thing to do. We had a lot of classes at Skidmore where it was like MB 107 is like what they're most famous for. You get a big company that it has a Harvard Business Review about it. So like mine was Papa John's. They've done Target, Disney, like all these different things, and you have to increase sales by $500 million or whatever, and then you have a team for literally the whole semester to figure out, okay, this is how we're going to do it. Again, you present it at the end. Very cool concept, but I would say the entrepreneurial stuff definitely came from taking those classes and having those opportunities. And it also just so happens that my parents were entrepreneurial, but I will say growing up, I was like, oh, I want to be a business person or an entrepreneur or anything like that, because I didn't. But I think having them, there later in life, as a support system for everything was awesome, has been great. It's still great, but I don't think that was like my driving force for why I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I think it was more the experience myself at Skidmore. And it's weird. They kind of set it up like a mini MBA. Like they just set it up so well as far as just giving you different opportunities to try different things. And even if you're not a business major there, they have a business plan competition that you can enter. There was kids who wanted to start different bakeries or something to do with like learning or, anything that you wanted to do. Even if you weren't a business major, you can enter the business plan competition to win. I think it was like $10,000 or something like that, to start your business. So there was a definite high value on entrepreneurship. But like I said, I didn't know that that's even what I wanted to go into school for. So I had all these resources that actually really worked out for me. And this is one of the reasons I didn't want to leave. But going into the situation, I didn't even know that I wanted any or needed any of that. It
Mm-hmm.
just aligned really well for me.
Yeah. So how does everything get started once you're out of college? You said you had a job, you were working for other companies. What made you pivot and say, I'm going to own my own company? Or were you working on this as you were working for other companies?
Yeah, I was working on this as I was working for other companies. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I'll kind of start this, but like this other like stuff is my career. And I'll just kind of do this on the side or for fun. And it got to a point where it was like both were kind of suffering because it was like, okay, I'm working crazy hours in New York City in finance. And now I have to go on the weekends to lacrosse Final Four or whatever tournaments were happening. And I'm driving back and forth. I'm doing all these things, and it was like, okay, I have no life, and I need to have a life a little bit. So, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, I'm gonna go for this thing. So you go for it 100%, and this is again where I fall back into my parents. I feel like I'm hyping up my parents so much right now.
They sound like parents of the
Yeah,
year,
yeah, I
honestly.
know, right? Like, really hyping them up. But they were super supportive. My now husband, I was dating at the time, so he was very supportive. Boyfriend at the time, but now husband. Very supportive. I had like a really cool support system around me, and I think it was just one of those things where, again, I was like pretty decisive on it. Like, okay, I'm gonna go do this thing. And started it, and like in the beginning, like made so many wrong decisions, had no idea what I was doing. There have been plenty of times where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I want to quit everything else. Um, I haven't had that feeling in a long time, so that's good. But I mean, it's just like being a college athlete. You go through so many different emotions. You go through wins, losses, good times, bad times, everything else. So you gotta power through. But I think the big thing was realizing that what I thought I wanted to do out of my career was not necessarily what I what ended up happening as I started down that career path, which is fine. That happens to so many people. And I decided to change it.
Mhm. So before we get to 5 questions, I want you to kind of give us um, kind of I don't want to say elevator pitch, but kind of the overall summary of what Two A Days is and how it was kind of molded and how it's grown over the time that you've had it created.
For sure. So, quickest way to put it is it's rate my professor, but for college coaches and college athletics. So you can go on either rate or see ratings of college coaches, athletic directors, assistant coaches, strength trainers, anybody that's involved with the uh, college athletic process. And then also, like I said way earlier, campus visits and facilities as well. So kind of just starting to get that all encompassing view of what it's like to be a college athlete at that school. Um, it's grown when we first started, it was just head coaches. And we always allowed all sports because we have all sports, junior college, NAIA, and NCAA. But it was just the head coaches. But now we've expanded, obviously, into all these other facets of the college athletic space. And I think that's great because as much as a head coach is important, there's still a lot of other people that are equally as important, especially when you're talking about like even an athletic director for fundraising or, you know, pushing forward things for athletes that are super important to, you know, higher levels at universities and everything else. And then, you know, depending on who you are, facilities might really matter. Facilities may not matter. I think that's when you kind of get into the point where it's like, okay, you have to realize who you are and what you think is valuable for yourself at that time. So that's really the number one way I would say that we've grown. And then we also have a whole information section that is our blog and our DIY recruiting guides that are really trying to just have accessible information to everybody. So there's no charge. We're just trying to get information out there, get firsthand experiences out there. We talk to a lot of college athletes and coaches and everybody else about, hey, just give us like, what was your experience like? What did you go through? We have a series called Recruiting Horror Stories, which is just kind of overall just like do's and don'ts in the recruiting process. People have lost scholarships because they're you know, something happened with the parent while the coach was recruiting them, or anything that could have happened in the recruiting process that went wrong. And then the DIY recruiting guides, which are really just like high level. Okay, this is like what you need to do to just at least start your process.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome, and I mean, I think that's great. You know, it's certainly necessary for every single athlete out there because you know a lot of the times, and I graduated from college in 2009. You have to go on these recruiting trips, and you have to rely on the students on these recruiting trips or the flashy pamphlet that you see. Like, you don't get a lot of reality. So I think this is a great tool, and you know, I think a lot of athletes, if you're listening, you should definitely be using this tool because it'll give you that insight that you certainly need to make those decisions. Um, Now, I want to move on to our 5 question segment. And the first question I have for you is sports related. What was that sports epiphany kind of where you were like, this is my sport? And maybe it was about tennis, but what was that sports epiphany or that maybe that moment on the court that you were like, this is my sport and this is where I belong?
I think for me, it was probably like one of my first tournaments that I played. Like I mentioned before, tennis is like a relatively young sport. Like kids will start playing like 8, 9, 10 years old, and they'll get into tournaments and everything. I was a little bit later on the tournament circuit. I think I was like 12 or something the first time I played, 11 or 12. Um, and I just remember going out there and like getting on the court for my first tournament. I was so nervous, of course, as everybody is when they get out there for the first time. But I was so nervous, but it was like a very good kind of nerves. It was very positive. It was like a situation where I feel like I just kind of was like, okay, I've been like practicing and doing all these things, just been like fun, but this is like what it's about. So I think just kind of first time getting out there in a real like actual competition um, setting was where I was like, all right, I like this.
Yeah. Once you made the transition to soccer when you were in college, um, how many things would you say changed in your life where, like you said, you weren't in a situation with tennis that you truly liked? What was that number one thing that you were like, okay, yes, this was worth it?
Oh, 100% my team. Like having a huge team was awesome. Like it was just overnight, just like such a different vibe. Just because I mean, inherently there's so many more girls on the field. Like soccer teams are just going to be bigger than tennis teams. That's just like an inherent thing of the sport. But I just so happened to get on a team that was like very awesome. I loved my coach. I loved my team. I was just like very much I don't know, it was like a very freeing experience for a lot of different reasons. And I think the challenge of, because, you know, sometimes with your own sport, maybe you get a little cocky or like complacent or, you know, you get into your routine of your sport. But I think challenging myself with a new sport was a really cool thing for me and being like, wow, I like have to work really, really hard to be to even like step up close to these girls. Like, I'm not even going to say I was ever even on their level, but just to even get to a point where I was working really hard, and it was like, I think by my senior year, I played in like 14 or 15 games, but like my sophomore year, I played in two. So like, I think working hard for that was really cool. And then having a team that was like really supportive of me was also awesome. Like I'd have so many teammates who would like stay after with me, run me through how to even like play on a college level field and what different positions looked like and all these things. So I just had a really like lucky situation as far as my team was concerned.
Mhm. Business wise, when you first launch your company and it's out there, what's the what's the first week like of having your own company? Are you pulling your hair out? Are you questioning everything? And then you said that there were days you just wanted to quit. But what's that first week of experience when you first launch?
First week is a lot of refreshing the page. Just like, is this real still? Did anyone hack this? Is this real? How many visitors are on it? Definitely very like exciting, stressful, um, and cool. I think it's like a very cool thing. It's like cool to like kind of get your own gear in, and you're like, oh man, this is my brand. But it's also stressful too because you're gonna get criticized. You're gonna get people saying this is not a good idea. You're gonna get people mad at you. You're going to get a lot of different things, no matter what business that you're in. And I think realizing like, hey, I can't please everyone is like a huge thing. But in the beginning, you're just like so amped up about it, and you want to try to be everything for everyone, but it's just not the case. So I think, me personally, I think I definitely had like unrealistic, like optimistic expectations. I got humbled real quick on that though.
So, what was the first goal that you guys hit where it kind of brought everything full circle for you?
I think it was overall just like proof of concept as far as like, okay, we want to get athletes in rating, like feeling comfortable to rate their coach because especially when we started this in like 2015, it was a different space for rating things. So like, yeah, you had Rate My Professor, and our site has always been like anonymous as far as the ratings are concerned. So there was never any question of like, oh, my coach is going to find out. But at the same time, I think people still get nervous, like, oh, is my coach going to find out? Like, are they going to sell them my information, or is something going to happen? Whatever. So I think just like trying to gain trust of people to come to the site and feel comfortable enough to rate and know that we're not like selling information. We're not doing like anything to um, do anything other than protect the student athlete, their experiences, their voice. I think was super important to me because there's a lot wrong with college sports as far as like not having a definition for coach abuse, and there's no across the board things happening with like training for signs of mental health. And I think it's a lot of times school to school, but I think allowing athletes to have a place to be able to come and feel 100% comfortable to share their experience, whether it's publicly as themselves on our blog or anonymously as a rater, I think was like the number one important thing, like important goal to happen. And we definitely achieved that. It was a really exciting thing to kind of see come to fruition.
Hmm. So last question, and it's the same one that everyone gets is what's a piece of advice that you would pass on to that next generation? Maybe it was, something that your parents of the year said to you or a coach that said to you, either positive or negative, but it's something that sticks with you that the next generation should definitely know.
Yeah, I think and it's interesting because if you look at all the interviews I've done, it probably always changes slightly over time. But I think right now my advice slash motto would be just like staying true to yourself. I know it sounds so cliche, but it's so true because if you can't be 100% authentic yourself 100% of the time, I think it's hard to be truly happy. And I think that's a problem that a lot of athletes might fall into, especially with a lot of pressures from club teams, other parents, what other offers people are getting, what priorities you think you may have at the time. But if you can try and put the blinders on as much as possible and be 100% true to yourself as far as, hey, I know I'm being told, or, there's this outside pressure of my best friend just got a offer as a sophomore and I feel like I'm behind the process because I'm now a junior and I'm not good enough or whatever. If you can kind of be 100% yourself and really prioritize what it is that's important to you, I think that's the number one thing I would say.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's, awesome advice. The only thing we do perfectly is being ourselves, right? So
Yeah.
might as
Yeah.
well continue to do that. Now before we let you go, I kind of want you to plug Two A Days a little bit. Let us know where we can find you guys on social media, websites, or anything else like that.
Yeah, so Two A Days, if you search on any social, should pop up. It's either Two A Days or Two A Days underscore ratings. Depends on each platform. I know for Instagram specifically, it's Two A Days underscore rating, but our YouTube and everything else is pretty much Two A Days. So that's where you can find us, and we reply to all DMs and any questions that people have. Or you could just go to our website, which is twoadays.com. So that's probably the easiest way to find us. And the easiest way to get in contact with us through emailing us on the contact us part of the website. But other than that, that's all I got.
That's that's all we need. That's all we
Yeah.
need. That's awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time out. It's been a really great conversation. As I said when we started doing all my research about you and seeing all the different things, I was really intrigued by your entire story and your entire background, and couldn't wait to pick your brain and hear about, your journey and your path. So I really appreciate you taking some time out. Before we let you go, do you have anything else for us here today?
No, I think we said it all. I think I did a lot of talking. My parents are the best parents in the world.
Right? If I see the views and the listens on this, I'm going to be like, I think we're at 150. It's probably just her parents listening to this over and over again.
Too funny. Thank you for having me, though. I really appreciate it. It was awesome.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. I'm going to let you go, but I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. To make sure you don't miss when a new episode comes your way, head to the Athletes to Athletes YouTube page to like and subscribe, or to Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcast. Again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next time.